Tamil, Malayalam, Telugu, Kannada, Brahui, and a great many others make up the Dravidian language family, with the ancestor of them all, Proto-Dravidian, spoken by a group of people who lived near a hot, dry, deciduous forest somewhere in this region. The idea that any of the languages of southern India were not just unrelated to the Indo-European languages, but also related to each other, was first proposed by Alexander Campbell and Francis Ellis in 1816, at least in the modern field of linguistics anyway. And they proposed that Tamil and Telugu were related to each other, and not to the Indo-Aryan languages of northern India. That, and a book about the idea, was all they actually did about it. It took another 40 years before Robert Cladwell came and updated as well as expanded the family, and he did it on a dramatic scale. Along with extra work, he incorporated most of the primary and secondary branches used in the modern Reconstruction, and he introduced the term Dravidian as the name for the language family, although the term itself he took from a piece of literature written in Sanskrit which referred to the people of southern India. These days, the reconstructed proto-language has 19 consonants, which are Amma, Abba, Anna, Atta, Anna, Atta, Ara, Ala, Anna, Atta, Ala, Anya, Atya, Aya, Akka, and Awa, as well as the allophone Anga, as well as these two. These two symbols are a lot harder to reconstruct because the evidence for them is far more lacking. This one was probably Aha, whilst this one was either Asha or Aja. There are also 12 vowels: I, U, U, E, U, A, and A, as well as the diphthongs I and ow. The language is also constructed with SOV word order and a suffixing agglutinative system of morphology. In fact, the language showed no signs of having any prefixes of any kind at all. This will be the section of the video where I will give you a reconstructed piece of vocabulary. However, although there is a sizable amount of reconstructed vocabulary for Proto-Dravidian, it has been a bit hard trying to find any verbs, which is kind of important to actually making a sentence. Therefore, I'm going to try counting to 10 in Proto-Dravidian instead. Ontu, itantu, muh, nal, daim, datu, esh, entu, to, bachtu. We've covered some phonemes and we have some grammar. However, our language is still spoken in some kind of abstract void currently, so it is best to now try and locate where the language was probably spoken. There are, however, like a lot of these things, more than one main theory. In this case, there are two of them. All the theories use the same data for when the language was spoken, in this case about 6,000 years ago, and the locations range from Elam to southern India for where the language was spoken. However, of the two main theories here, they place a region somewhere in the Indus region or in the Deccan Plateau, which is not actually that far away, with the Indus Valley being the generally preferred region where the language was originally spoken. So, with a date and a region, it becomes possible to predict a culture that probably spoke Proto-Dravidian. Throughout the last couple of hundred years, more than one person has tried doing this, and it has now settled to one of two groups that probably spoke Proto-Dravidian. They are the Ahar-Banas culture and the Indus River Valley civilization. And although reconstructed vocabulary does suggest a more complex society than just simple farmers, the Ahar-Banas culture did live under the shadow of the Indus civilization, and that means both languages are likely to end up with very similar vocabulary because of the sheer amount of influence one would have had on the other. However, as a lot of the vocabulary for the more complex parts of the Proto-Dravidian lexicon don't seem to be borrowed, it has led most people to assume that it's probably the Indus River Valley civilization that spoke the Proto-Dravidian language. In either case, around 3,000 to 2,500 years ago, the Indo-Aryan speakers began arriving in far northern India, and with their arrival came a displacement southwards of the Proto-Dravidian speakers. With this sudden expansion of area and a massively changed set of environments that the language was spoken in, the Proto-Dravidian language began to break up into its descendants. The standard classification says the language broke up into 3 branches. At first, South and Central Dravidian, which moved southwards, and we have Northern Dravidian, which stayed in the places that it was originally spoken before later migrating eastwards as population pressure increased further from more Indo-Aryan migration. There is, however, other theories that are less generally accepted for the breakup to Proto-Dravidian language, and the most notable of these is that the central branch isn't actually something that exists, and that what would become the central branch in the traditional Reconstruction language actually broke up into 2 branches more or less immediately, and this leaves these 2 branches and the southern branch being the ones that migrated south at the same time, leaving the northern branch where it was before it was further migrated later on. If we follow the traditional 3-branched design of the language, we can have a look at how they changed from Proto-Dravidian into the first set of descendants. However, trying to find the details for this during my research was difficult, and as a result, I can only actually give generalizations on how each one changed. All 3 branches had little or no change at all in the vowels. Even to this day, the Proto-Dravidian language family has a very similar set of vowels across the language family, with a similar distribution of these vowels. Also, with the exception of a handful of the languages, most of the branches also developed voice consonants some point shortly after the division of the language family, although this likely happened after several branches had already lost contact with each other, and can be put down more to several different independent occurrences of the same event rather than a generally shared item across any of the branches. And now to backtrack all the way from 2,500 years ago to lots of thousands of years ago to the possible ancestors of the Proto-Dravidian language. As we've seen over and over again, there are exactly 0 commonly accepted ancestors. However, that hasn't stopped people from trying, and there are in fact 10 or so proposed ancestors from one place to another throughout the last few hundred years since the language family was first proposed. Although these days none of these roughly 10 ancestors are actually commonly accepted, there used to be 3 that had any kind of credibility, although all 3 have now obviously no longer accepted generally. These 3 are with the Indo-European family, the Uralic family, and the Elamite language. All 3 languages were taken down for different reasons. The Proto-Indo-European connection is almost certainly a false positive, coming from the fact that there is a huge amount of substratum influence in the Indo-Aryan languages of northern India that originated from the Dravidian languages, which persist all the way to this day. The connection with the Elamite language has little similarity except for a little bit of syntax and around 20% of the vocabulary, which isn't generally credible in the linguistic field as a proof of connection, especially with the amount of trade possible speakers of the Proto-Dravidian languages would have had in the area around where it was spoken, which would make sharing vocabulary very easy over long distances. The third proposal of these actually held the most credit for the longest period of time. The connection between Proto-Uralic and Proto-Dravidian actually saw quite a large amount of support from several key Dravidian linguists. However, there was almost no support at all from the counterparts in the Uralic field. As a result, the language hypothesis eventually just slowly lost more and more credibility as more evidence turned up that even started taking away the Dravidian support in the proposed language family. As a result, even it has now lost credibility as the possible ancestor, leaving us with no really particularly widely accepted ancestor to Proto-Dravidian at all. Anyway, Thanks for watching, and next time I'll be looking into the culture that probably spoke the Proto-Dravidian language, as well as looking at a reconstructed language to look at what is the daily life of a Proto-Dravidian speaker was probably like.